Picture this. 12 young men kneel in the dirt, hands tied behind their backs. They're not soldiers. They're the sons of Trojan nobility, shaking, barely old enough to grow beards. Standing over them is Achilles. He doesn't give a speech. He doesn't hesitate. He grabs the first boy by the hair, yanks his head back, and opens his throat with a bronze blade. The body twitches. Achilles drags it to a towering funeral pyre and throws it into the fire. Then he turns back. Second boy. Third. All 12 are slaughtered like livestock, offered up to the flames to satisfy his grief. This is not the golden, shining hero from the movies. This is a war criminal committing human sacrifice. This is Achilles without the filter. Before we dig deeper into these forgotten stories of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering the darker truths of history, take a second to like the video and subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're listening from. It still amazes me that people across the world are connected by the same ancient stories, separated by centuries, but united by curiosity. Now let's talk about the blood on Achilles' hands. Homer didn't include this massacre by accident. He put it in the Iliad to show us that Achilles had crossed a line. To the ancient Greeks, mistreating a corpse or performing human sacrifice wasn't just cruel. It was religious pollution, a stain on the soul. But Achilles no longer cared. By this point in the war, he was operating outside the laws of gods and men. The Iliad opens with a warning. Its very first word is menace. It's usually translated as rage, but that's too gentle. Menace is divine wrath, a cosmic force reserved for gods like Zeus or Apollo. When a human wields it, society fractures. The story of Achilles is the story of that fracture spreading until it destroys everything around it. For 9 long years, the Greek army rotted on the beaches of Troy. This wasn't a noble crusade. It was a loose coalition of pirate kings, raiding the coastline for gold, livestock, and women. Disease tore through the camps. Morale collapsed. And in this chaos, Achilles became their ultimate weapon. He didn't just fight. He annihilated. He led the Myrmidons, an elite shock unit that moved faster and hit harder than any other formation on the field. But the man slaughtering boys at a funeral pyre wasn't born a monster. He was manufactured. Let's shatter the myth right now. You've heard the story. His mother dips him in the river Styx, holding him by the heel, making him invulnerable. That version is Roman propaganda, added centuries later to make the tale safer, cleaner, and more child-friendly. The original Greek myth is far darker. Achilles' mother, Thetis, didn't use water. She used fire. She despised the mortality she sensed in her infant son. To her, his human flesh was a flaw. So every night, she placed the baby into the red-hot embers of the palace hearth. She let the flames scorch his skin, trying to burn away his weakness and replace it with divine endurance. She was forging a child the way a blacksmith forges a blade. One night, his father Peleus walked in. He saw his wife roasting their screaming son and tore the child from the fire. The ritual stopped, but the damage was done. From infancy, Achilles learned that love came wrapped in violence, that to be special, you had to endure pain. This wasn't a childhood. It was an assembly line for a killer. To finish the process, Peleus sent him away, not to a palace or an academy, but to the wilderness. Achilles was raised on Mount Pelion by Chiron the centaur. Forget the kindly mentor archetype. Chiron fed the boy raw lion intestines and the marrow of wild boars. Ancient logic followed sympathetic magic. You become what you consume. By eating apex predators, Achilles absorbed their ferocity, their lack of mercy, He slept on bare earth, hunted bears on foot, and learned to see empathy as a weakness. By the time the Trojan War began, the Greeks hadn't recruited a hero. They had unleashed a weapon of mass destruction. Achilles had the body of a god and the emotional development of a child, driven by one obsession: Kleos, eternal glory. He knew the prophecy: go to Troy and die remembered, or stay home and fade into obscurity. He chose blood. And as he throws those 12 Trojan boys onto the fire, we see what that choice truly cost. He didn't just trade his life for fame, he traded his humanity, and the worst was still ahead. To understand the terror Achilles inspired, we need to look at how he fought. Forget polished steel and cinematic swordplay. The Trojan War took place in the late Bronze Age, a world of soft metal. Bronze bends, it dents. Every fight required weapons to be hammered back into shape. Sword blows didn't slice cleanly. They crushed bone. Armor was worse. The famous Dendra panoply wasn't a sleek suit. It was a clumsy, lobster-like shell of bronze plates that trapped heat and restricted movement. Most men lumbered inside it, slow and exhausted. But Achilles moved differently. Homer lingers on his equipment for a reason. His power began with his spear, the Pelian ash. Cut from the summit of Mount Pelion, it was so massive and dense that no other Greek hero could even lift it. Not Agamemnon, not Ajax, not Odysseus. Think about that. While other warriors jabbed with light spears that shattered against shields, Achilles drove a timber beam tipped with bronze into his enemies. When it hit, it didn't just pierce. It transferred devastating kinetic force, shattering shields, arms, and ribs. This wasn't fencing, it was demolition. And behind him came the Myrmidons. Myth says they were ants transformed into men. The metaphor is unsettlingly accurate. In an age of chaotic tribal warfare, they fought with hive mind discipline. They didn't scatter, they swarmed. While other kings commanded farmers and fishermen desperate to go home, Achilles led a professional private army, the Bronze Age equivalent of special forces. Silent, relentless, perfectly synchronized. When Achilles charged, the Myrmidons surged behind him like a black tide, breaking Trojan lines through sheer coordinated violence. This was the machine he commanded. And he didn't fight for patriotism. He didn't fight for Helen. He fought because war was the only economy he understood. Before Troy became a 10-year stalemate, Achilles turned the war into a business. He didn't wait behind the walls. He went out and took what he wanted. 12 coastal cities fell. 11 inland towns were wiped out. Livestock was stolen, villages burned, and women were captured and sold. This wasn't collateral damage. It was the system. This is what the heroic life actually looked like. Piracy on an industrial scale. And while it built his legend, it also planted the seeds of catastrophe. In ancient Greek culture, honor wasn't abstract. It was physical, measurable. A man's worth was counted in loot piled in his tent and captives in his bed. Take that away, and you didn't just insult him, you erased him. You made him socially non-existent. This context matters, because Achilles wasn't just a great fighter. He was a man engineered for violence, armed with a spear no one else could lift, commanding a death squad of ant-men and operating on a currency of plunder. He was a powder keg. All he needed was a spark. And that spark wouldn't come from a Trojan blade. It would come from his own commander. Before the Myrmidons, before the piles of loot, before the title Best of the Achaeans, the greatest killer in the world once tried to disappear. There's a strange chapter in the Trojan War that that often gets brushed aside because it doesn't fit the hyper-masculine image of Achilles. Just months before the fleet sailed, he wasn't sharpening weapons. He was hiding on the island of Scyros. Terrified by the prophecy that her son would die at Troy, Thetis smuggled Achilles into the court of King Lycomedes. She dressed him as a girl, named him Pyrrha, and hid him among the king's daughters. Picture the psychological tension. A young man raised on lion guts and marrow, trained to shatter bones, now forced into silk robes, weaving wool, making small talk. A wolf pretending to be a sheep. It couldn't last. The Greek leaders knew Troy was impossible without him, so they sent their best manipulator, Odysseus. Odysseus didn't knock on the door and ask. He laid a trap. Disguised as a merchant, he spread his wares in the palace hall. Jewelry, perfumes, fine fabrics, everything expected to attract royal girls. But beneath the cloth, almost as an afterthought, he placed a shield and a razor-sharp spear. The princesses rushed to the jewelry, laughing, admiring themselves. But one girl drifted toward the weapons. Achilles' hands didn't reach for gold. They hovered over the spear. The body remembers what the mind tries to hide. Then Odysseus signaled his men. A war trumpet blasted outside the hall. Chaos erupted. The real princesses screamed and fled. But Pyrrha didn't run. He ripped off his disguise, grabbed the shield and spear, and scanned for enemies. The predator had revealed himself. Odysseus smiled. The hiding was over. This moment defines Achilles' tragedy. He had an escape. He could have chosen the long, quiet life. Marriage, children, an anonymous death in a warm bed. But when the trumpet sounded, his nature chose for him. He boarded the ship, knowing exactly what awaited him. He wasn't sailing toward victory. He was sailing toward his funeral. Once at Troy, the clock started ticking. For 9 years, Achilles drowned the knowledge of his fate in violence. He sacked cities. He carried the war for Agamemnon, the high king of Mycenae, a man who commanded from the rear and claimed the glory. It's a dynamic as old as war itself. Talent in the field, management in the tent. And it leads us to the spark that ignites the Iliad. Not strategy, not territory. A woman named Briseis. But this isn't a love story. Briseis wasn't a girlfriend. She was a prize, a living medal of honor awarded to Achilles by the army. Proof of his time, his worth. When Agamemnon seized her out of petty insecurity, he didn't just insult Achilles. He erased him. He declared, "Your achievements belong to me." For a man who had chosen death over obscurity, this was unforgivable. So Achilles did the unthinkable. He withdrew. And when he stopped fighting, the war didn't stall. It reversed. Without the Myrmidons anchoring the line, the Greek formation collapsed. The Trojans realized the predator was gone. They opened the Scaean gate and poured out, led by Hector. Hector is often remembered as the noble defender, and he was. But without Achilles to stop him, he became something else, a juggernaut. He hunted the Greeks across the plain, driving them back mile by bloody mile until they were forced into a humiliating retreat toward their ships. The situation grew so desperate that the Greeks built a defensive wall and trench around their own camp. Think about that. The besiegers were now besieged. Inside the Myrmidon camp, the atmosphere was unbearable. Achilles sat in his tent, playing the lyre and singing old songs, while the smoke of burning Greek corpses drifted in on the sea breeze. This wasn't sulking, it was leverage. He was letting his allies die to prove his value. Then came the breaking point. Hector smashed through the Greek defenses and surged into the camp with firebrands. He lunged for the ships. If they burned, the Greeks were finished. Patroclus couldn't watch anymore. Achilles' closest companion begged him, "If you won't fight, let me. Let me wear your armor. Let me lead the Myrmidons. If they see your helmet, they'll think you've returned." Achilles agreed, but with one fatal condition. "Drive them from the ships. Do not pursue them to Troy. Do not steal my glory." Patroclus donned the armor, but he couldn't wield the Pelian ash. The spear stayed behind. He took a lighter weapon, rallied the Myrmidons, and charged. The effect was electric. The Trojans panicked. They thought death itself had returned. They fled. And Patroclus, drunk on momentum, forgot the warning. He chased them to the walls. There, beneath Troy's towers, the illusion shattered. Apollo struck him from behind. Euphorbus wounded him. Hector delivered the killing blow. And with Patroclus's death, the human half of Achilles died with him. A runner sprinted to the tent carrying the news. When Achilles heard it, he didn't rage. He collapsed. The strongest man alive clawed at the earth, pouring dust over his head, lying broken in the dirt like a fallen statue. This wasn't grief. It was annihilation. And while Achilles lay there, Hector stripped Patroclus's body and wore Achilles' own armor. The beast was awake now, and it was about to feed. Achilles rose from the dirt unarmed. No armor, no spear, no shield. He walked to the edge of the Greek trench and stopped. He didn't cross it. He just stood there, silhouetted against the setting sun. Athena wrapped a golden cloud around his head and set it ablaze so fire seemed to pour from his hair. And then Achilles screamed. Not a command, not a rallying cry. A raw, inhuman roar. The sound alone shattered the Trojan ranks. Horses reared, chariots overturned. Men trampled each other in blind panic. 12 Trojans died without Achilles lifting a finger, impaled on their own spears or crushed beneath wheels. Terrified, they abandoned Patroclus's body and fled back behind the walls. Night fell. Achilles refused to wash, refused to eat, refused to sleep. He swore he would not bury Patroclus until he had Hector's head and the heads of 12 Trojan nobles. But rage alone wasn't enough. He needed armor. Thetis went to Hephaestus, the smith of the gods. What he forged that night was not just protection, it was cruel irony. On Achilles' shield, Hephaestus hammered the entire world, fields being plowed, weddings, dancing, courts of law, vineyards heavy with grapes, peace, life. Everything Achilles was about to abandon. When he strapped on the armor at dawn, the Myrmidons couldn't look at it. The shine was unbearable. Achilles lifted the shield that carried the life he would never live and yoked his immortal horses, Xanthus and Balius. Hera gave Xanthus the power of speech. The horse warned him, "We will save you today, but your death is near." Achilles answered without blinking. He already knew. Then he charged. What followed was not a battle. It was a purge. Achilles split the Trojan army in two, driving one half toward the city and herding the other into the river Scamander. Thousands of men were forced into the churning water. Achilles followed them in. The river turned red almost instantly. He moved through the current like a machine, hacking at bodies, repeating the motion over and over. No strategy, no mercy, just slaughter. A young prince, Lycaon, crawled from the mud and grabbed Achilles' knees. He begged. He offered ransom. Achilles looked down and said, "Come, friend. You too must die. Even Patroclus died, and he was far better than you. And look at me, handsome, strong, and death waits for me as well." Then he killed him and threw the body into the river. The corpses clogged the water. The river stopped flowing, and the river woke up. The river god Scamander rose and demanded Achilles stop choking his channels with dead men. Achilles told the god to get out of his way. The river attacked, hurling waves of blood and debris at him, dragging him under. For the first time, Achilles felt fear, not of death, but of dying without glory, drowned in mud like an animal. The gods intervened. Hephaestus turned fire on the river. Trees burned, water boiled, Scamander surrendered, Achilles emerged alive. Only one man remained outside Troy's walls, Hector. Achilles advanced, shining like Sirius, the star of disaster. Hector's parents begged him to retreat. He couldn't. Pride nailed him in place. When Achilles charged, Hector broke. They ran around the walls 3 times. An entire city watched its champion flee in terror. Athena tricked Hector into stopping. He turned, tried to bargain. Achilles refused. There are no pacts between men and lions. The fight was brief. Hector's spear bounced off Achilles' shield. Achilles drove his ash spear through the gap at the collarbone. Hector fell, begging for his body to be returned. Achilles whispered that he wished he could eat him raw. Then came the desecration. Achilles slit Hector's tendons, tied the corpse to his chariot, and dragged it before the screaming walls of Troy. For 12 days, he repeated it, grinding the body into the dirt. Apollo protected the corpse from decay, but the intent was clear. This was the lowest point of Achilles' soul. Then came Priam. Under cover of night, guided by Hermes, the old king walked into the enemy camp carrying ransom. He knelt before Achilles and kissed the hands that had killed his son. He asked Achilles to remember his own father, and the rage finally broke. The 2 enemies wept together. Achilles returned Hector's body, shared a meal with Priam, and granted a truce. For a moment, Achilles was human again, but the clock was still ticking. After the truce, Achilles returned to battle knowing his death was near. He killed legends. He breached Troy's gates. And there, at the height of victory, Apollo guided Paris's arrow. It struck Achilles in the heel. The swiftest warrior alive fell. He died not in a glorious duel, but under a rain of arrows. His body was fought over, rescued, and burned on a pyre beside Patroclus. He had his Kleos, eternal fame. But the truth comes later. In the Odyssey, Odysseus meets Achilles' ghost in the underworld and praises his glory. Achilles answers with regret. I would rather be a slave to a poor man on earth than king of all the dead. That is the real ending of Achilles' story. He wasn't a hero. He was a warning. He traded life for legacy and learned too late that breathing, eating, loving, and feeling the sun were worth more than all the glory in the world.